All right, we are live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the Career Chronicles. We're so excited to have you. My name is Sloan, and as usual, I am your host. And we are sponsored by my wonderful team over at Spyglass Partners. We are a staffing agency that prioritizes partnering great talent with great teams. I wanted to dig in a little bit on, the heart behind the podcast before introducing our wonderful guest, Jeremy. I started this podcast with the hope that we would advocate for people from different backgrounds, especially women in tech, and figure out how organizations can better recruit and retain women and create workplaces that people want to work in. And Jeremy and I have been having a conversation about this, and I'm so excited to have him on the podcast today to share his insights. And Jeremy, you're actually our first male guest. So that's an honor, an honorary ally of the women in tech. We're so excited to have you. I am going to share a little bit more about Jeremy. He is a two-time founder and experienced product and engineering leader who is passionate about creating award-winning products that serve millions of users, as well as developing extremely high-functioning teams. An industry veteran, Jeremy has led innovative product development at mostly early and growth stage startup SaaS companies. The past 2 years, Jeremy has led engineering at CareMessage as his first foray into healthcare. He's a long-term mentor, a sought-after speaker on the topic of product development and leadership, and has been featured in multiple publications, including contributing authorship in 97 Things Every Engineering Manager Should Know, which is in the O'Reilly Press 2019. And we're so excited to have your insights here on the Career Chronicles. Thanks for joining us, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, Sloan. Super excited to be here and to get to chat with you and your listeners.
Yeah, so listeners, jump into the chat, say hello, and drop your questions and feedback and thoughts in the chat. We want this to be conversational and want this to spark some new conversations. Jeremy, the way that we got connected is you made a LinkedIn post that has, I don't know if I want to say gone viral, but it's it's sparked some conversations and struck a chord with a lot of people. Can you just tell us a little bit about, your thinking behind the post? You said that as a hiring manager, you are rooting for the interviewee. Where does that mentality come from, and how does that fit into how you approach management and leadership?
Yeah, well, I'll say I think that's definitely the post that has gotten the most attention of anything I've ever said, I think.
You probably weren't prepared for that. Probably wasn't the intent behind the post.
The ironic thing is, literally, I've been thinking about this. So the thing that I said is, I'm, as an interviewer, I want people to know that I'm rooting for you if I'm interviewing for you. Like, I'm rooting for you to succeed. And I have thought about this multiple times. Like, do people know this, right? Are people aware? And I think sometimes, a lot of the time things for me is like, I know things, but I need to be reminded of those things. And so it was literally, I, had just gotten off in an interview and was like, hey, I'm actually going to wrote this down, closed my laptop for the day. Cause it's the end of the day.
You told the interviewee, I'm actually going to post about this. I want you to know that we are rooting for you.
And then the next morning I was like,
whoa. Close LinkedIn. We're done for the day.
It's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It was apparently controversial, and it's, who knew that rooting for people could be controversial?
I did not. I was surprised. I was surprised that
Me too. That's how I found it. I was like, what?
I guess I should be thankful for the couple of people who disagreed with that sentiment, because I guess it made it more. But it was not. I was not trying to fish for things or anything like that. The reason I posted that, and I think how that relates to some of the things that I think about, is like, I want people to understand that when I'm interviewing as an interviewer, right? Like, you're looking for the best fit for your culture, for the skill sets of the things that you need, and all, so on and so forth, right? Yeah. But it can be very easy to feel, and I know and this is for me, I always try to put myself in this position. How am I feeling? How would I feel if I was in in that person's shoes? And it's very easy to be nervous, especially with the job climate and the way things are. I know there are people that tech has been, riddled with layoffs for multiple months. And there are lots of really, really talented people out there looking for jobs and things like that. And so that, that's stressful. That's a person's life that they're dealing with. And so I just wanted like people to understand and hopefully go into it to understand, because if you can go into an interview like calm and, feeling with some level of confidence, right? Like, then you're likely going to do better because you're going to come across a little better. But at the same
100%.
time, yeah, but at the same time, like, I'm not, I also want people to understand, at least for me, and I hope that this is most interviewers, like, I'm not judging you if you stumble a little bit or if you are nervous. And I have had the opportunity where I've like, hey, like, it's okay. Like, let's just pause for a second when I see somebody's really visibly kind of nervous and things like that. Take a couple breaths. It's okay to think about a question before you answer it. You don't have to jump in. Those sorts of things, which I think also helps people to recognize who you are as a person, which is,
Yeah.
again, a second part of that, right? Is like, this is your first interaction with someone who you potentially may be working with you on your team. And you are setting an expectation already about what your values are, what your working relationship might look like, and things like that. And
Right.
so
You're
do
making your
you
first impression as well.
exactly. And so how do you want that, like, how do you want to be perceived? How do you want that
Yeah.
person to expect to interact with you? And so I think, showing a bit of compassion and empathy, again, doesn't take away at all from the fact that as an interviewer, you have a job to do, right? And you have to find, the right person for that role. But letting people know that, like, hey, you're hoping that they're going to be successful and trying to help them succeed. And I think that even that plays into how you ask questions as an interviewer
Yeah.
and how you actually approach that process. So yeah, but it was interesting that there was some controversy around that comment.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here because I think it is so easy to forget when you're in the interviewer seat that you once were in the other seat, maybe in that seat again sooner than you hope. It can
Mm,
very quickly flip on a dime for
yep.
all of us with this tech market. And so it is so easy, even as an empathetic person, to forget how to view that candidate empathetically and how not to come at an interview judgmentally. And so I think it's so important that you're putting that reminder out there. And I'd love to dig in more on how you craft questions. But I also do want to point out that it's an important recruiting tool too, to make a good first impression as the hiring manager, because on the other side, as an agency recruiter, I get to debrief with candidates when they're finished interviewing hiring managers. And I get to hear, how did the hiring manager make them feel? And I have seen before where a top candidate who maybe was like, I'm not actively looking, but this sounds like an interesting opportunity. I've seen when a hiring manager does a good job making that person feel heard, and they come at it inquisitively and they make that person feel good in the interview, how quickly that shifts to where now this person really wants to work for this company and with this person. So it's a great way to attract strong talent too. And I know that's not your intent. You're just coming at this from, being a good person and wanting to be somebody that makes people feel seen and heard and validated. But, there's benefits up and down the process from approaching interviews this way. So I wanted to point that out. So how do you, I want to dig in, you mentioned that, the empathy allows you to craft questions in a certain way. Are there certain things that hiring managers could learn from you as far as crafting these questions empathetically, but also inquisitively to get better results in an interview?
Um, well, I won't say from me because I'm definitely not the authority here, but I think that there are some things that I have learned that I can reshare that work well.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing, and this is, this practice sounds kind of obvious, but at the same time, I've just seen a lot of places that don't do this, especially if nobody's kind of looking at these sorts of things, is to create, equity in your interviewing process and make sure you're doing that fairly and not just doing, oh, this person looks like me, sounds like me, they have similar hobbies as me, and so I must like
Yeah.
them, they must be great. Is asking the same questions, right? Like, essentially having clear interview
Template.
questions that you're asking. Yeah, exactly. A playbook, a run book, right? That you're doing. Um,
Yeah.
and with, ideally, with, here's what good looks like. Here's what a good answer looks like, right? So that you're actually evaluating. Now, every answer is going to be a little bit different, but at least, like, here's what we're trying. Here's why we're asking that question for the interviewer, because in many cases, it may not be you, right? Like if you're crafting these questions, you might be then handing that off to somebody else. Hopefully it's not a one person show the whole way.
Right.
And again, that allows you to evaluate different candidates consistently, right? At least in terms of that part of it. But at the same time, what that can do is if you just read this, and I have seen this happen, right, where it can become very robotic, right? And you should make this a conversation, right? And even in the intent and spirit of that post that I wrote when I'm rooting for someone, if I have let's say I have a question that I'm asking somebody, and they answer it and they don't really answer it, which happens, right? Like they don't really get it, what I'm trying, like I will rephrase and re-ask,
which is so kind of you. I've sat in on interviews and hiring managers, they ding the candidate for that and they move on. Yeah. They're like, they didn't tell me about that. And I'm like, but did you ask? And did you check for understanding and push a little for, like, if there are things you want to assess and you need to get out of an interview, that's a little bit on you as the interviewer.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's the approach you take.
Yeah, exactly. And so, re-ask that question. I mean, I can't sit on the same question forever.
Too long. You can only give them so many chances.
Yeah, if I give a couple of chances and they're not really getting it, then I will move on, right? Because I have to get through these other questions. But I think even like thinking like that, right? Like just assuming, here's the thing, in communication, I'm always assuming that what I'm saying is what the other person understands. That's not the case. When we think about again, diversity, communication, right? Like I work with international teams, I hire internationally. A lot of people I interview, English is not their first language. You have to understand that, right? Like, and have that expectation that what you're asking may or may not come across exactly what you think it is. So give them the benefit of the doubt and re-ask that question, because again, you might be marking off a great potential hire for you based on your own, something that you did, inaccurately, or maybe it wasn't clear or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Your communication. 100%. So I think things just like this, like creating those question sets. And then, one other thing is, I said, I've seen people that don't do this well. One of the things that we do is we actually have an interviewer training, and they go through, and some of those things is like, understanding cognitive bias, right? And some of the things that you have, like understanding that these things exist. And the final step in this is actually doing a mock interview with somebody else on the team, where they can then give that, who is already an interviewer, and they can give you feedback. And I did this recently with someone who was involved in our process, and it was great. Like they did a good job overall, but I did have a point of feedback with something that I learned from observing somebody else doing an interview, right? That I hadn't done, which was, I'll just share this, is like, tell the person how many questions you want to ask. Why? Well, because so I will say at the start, hey, I've got about 10 questions I want you to ask, which they know if this is an hour-long interview, okay, they're expecting I'm about 5 minutes per question. I had never done that before.
Setting expectations ahead of time. Yeah,
you're just setting expectations up front. Like I would usually tell them, here's where we're headed, here's kind of the topics, but like actually give them the number of questions.
The time frame.
Yeah, so it kind of gives them the ability to kind of reference, okay, this is kind
of this is how deep Jeremy wants me to go in my answers.
Exactly. I don't have 3 questions, you know what I mean? That I want you to spend 15 minutes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, again, doing that kind of interviewer training and going through that can really help people, because it is a skill.
It's incredible professional development that you guys are providing for the people on your team too, to, train people up in how to interview. So, it leads me to think that at Care Message, you guys have this culture as a foundation of, you want to help people do a better job of, fighting biases, leading with empathy, and coming at things with a positive intent. You're assuming the positive intent in other people. And you're doing that from the leadership on down through. And it starts with interview processes when you're bringing, you're introducing people to your company. So you and I have talked about that, about the culture that you want to create. You want to create a team or a workplace where people want to come to work every day. How do you do that? And, where does your sense of empathy come from? How have you cultivated that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that last point. I thought about this a little bit, and I think I was really fortunate. I grew up in Sacramento, California, so it's a very diverse place. I grew up in not right in town, a little outside. So there was a lot of I had a lot of Ukrainian, Russian, Slavic refugees and immigrants when I was a little kid. I didn't realize these are just my friends, right? Like the people that we hung out with. a lot of Latino people, a lot of Black people, right? Like I just grew up around a lot of different people. And so I think that, I have the benefit that I kind of grew up that way around a lot of different
Yeah.
people types. But I think one of those things is like, put yourself, like that was something that I didn't get to choose, right? Like as a child, I lived where my parents lived, right? But I think as an adult and as a person who has agency to actually decide what you do, how do you put yourself in situations where you're actually learning and experiencing other cultures and peoples, right? One of the things so I lived in Thailand for 2.5 years, and I speak Thai, and I don't want to say like completely, but enough, right? But I learned, like I have the experience of not like when someone is talking to you in another language, I have to think about the words that they're saying, right? Like I have to, like, it takes me a moment to actually process what they just told me before I can respond, right? If you're only used to communicating with people who are native English speakers or that's their first language, then like,
you'll never know what that's like.
You can kind of read about it, but you don't have that experience, right? Yeah, but it's not the same. And so like that gives me a lot of empathy for people that I work with. Half of my engineers happen to be from Brazil. I've worked like again with people from all over the world, and like they're doing the same thing, right? Like, and they're doing it way better than I ever do, right? Like, and so like recognizing that there's a difference here. And again, so I think these sorts of things give you the ability to have empathy. So do you put yourself in situations that do you read things to better understand and have knowledge about the experience of others? Because like, again, that's, people with different language, which is, an aspect of diversity, right? Like cultural difference, but I'm never going to be able to put myself in the experience of a woman, right? Like, but I speak with other, people, and I listen to their experiences, and I read about these things and try and understand, right? Like some of the challenges and things that go on in those scenarios, so that I can develop a level of empathy for those scenarios. And I don't always get it right? Like I have made mistakes in the past as well, but like, do you learn from those? And do you
that was going to be my next question.
Apologize.
Is there a mistake that you've made that you've learned from? Others
so
now.
I mean, all the time. I mean, I had to apologize. I had to apologize to my team this week, literally, because I spoke too quickly about something that ultimately I had to backtrack about because I, overstepped in some areas. I was doing it because I was trying to help us all move quickly, but I made a mistake, right? But something that comes more to mind in terms of this is, a while ago when I was managing a team of engineers directly, I had a female on my team, and a female engineer, and we were doing an on-site, and we were figuring out different things and like saying, okay, who is a startup, right? So everybody's kind of pitching in. So we had different people leading different sessions, right, in this on-site that we were doing. And this individual, she suggested to me, hey, what do you think if we did like an Enneagram to better understand people's working styles, and then we can talk about that? I was like, oh, I think that's a great idea. I think that's like can be very valuable to understand just how people think and how people sense, right? And in true startup fashion, and this is how I operate, is like, oh, you had that idea, great, you should lead that, right? Like, your idea, that's the opportunity to lead something. So I said, hey, great, would you mind facilitating that topic? Which she did, and she did it in a wonderful job. After the on-site, when we were back, she said, hey, Jeremy, can I chat with you? Yes, sure, love to. Please never ask me to do that again. And I said, do what again? And she said, lead something of that nature. And I was like, okay, can you tell me more? Like, I'm surprised. I don't understand. And she said, well, I don't experience this here now, but I have experienced in the past where, because I'm a female and an engineer, people just expect I'll do anything that's kind of like stereotypically female, whether that's note taking or the leading a session. The touchy, yes, exactly. And she's like, and yes, I suggested, I thought it was a great idea, but I don't want that to become like
my what I'm known for. the
what I'm known
company.
for. Exactly.
She's the
This is
go-to
my
for
thing.
helping us deal with culture issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I don't also want it to undermine their expectation of me as a very strong engineer, which she was,
Yeah, the
right? Like,
technical side.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I listened. I did not, like, okay, like I never would have put those two things
Connected those.
together, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
And so
sure.
I really appreciate, first of all, the fact she was willing to come and tell me, right? Like, give me that
Well, it
feedback.
speaks a lot to the relationship you've built as a leader that she felt
Yeah.
comfortable sharing that with you openly, because that's
Yeah.
not always the culture.
Yeah. Um, and so what I've learned from that is like, be really thoughtful, right? Like, again, wouldn't it was just my default mode. You suggested it, you should lead it, right? Like, but I have to be more thoughtful because not everybody is me, right? Not everybody has the same experience as me and hasn't been treated the same, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
I can't just go with the things that make sense to me. I have to think more deeply about like what's the potential, what is this person experience? What's the potential there? And there's, it's a two-way street, right? Like I need them to give me feedback as well. But that was something definitely I learned. And I have for sure been more thoughtful about those
Yeah.
sorts of scenarios and how I might approach those in the future.
Yeah, that's a great example. And speaking of feedback, I know feedback is a gift. Good feedback is a gift. And this is a topic that people are talking a lot about on LinkedIn, is that many people in the job search aren't getting any feedback. They're either applying to the void and not hearing back anything, or they do interview and they just get the automated rejection. For you as a leader in engineering, how do you give feedback to the folks you interview, and how do you give feedback empathetically in a way that's helpful for candidates moving forward?
Yeah. Well, I'm first going to say this is a hard topic because I can tell you there's very likely other people who are listening to this who I've interviewed who I have not given feedback to. So
Yeah,
I am like,
I'm guilty of it too as a
yeah,
recruiter. There's been
yeah,
times where I haven't closed the loop. I always
yeah,
try,
yeah.
but no human is perfect.
Yeah. So it is hard because it's time consuming and there's a risk, right? There is
Mhm.
a risk, and I have given feedback to someone who has asked me for it, and it didn't go well for me, right? Like it was not received well, right? And that makes it hard. So it is like, So, anyways, all that to say, when I feel like there is something meaningful that I can provide for that person that I think that can be helpful. Sometimes there's just a mismatch in skill set, right? And things
Yeah.
like that. And that has nothing to do with that individual, right? Like it just has
Yeah.
to be like your skill doesn't match what we
Yep.
need. And I will say I probably do this more than other people. I try and widen my scope of people that I will screen at the beginning because sometimes people don't do a great job of articulating what their skill set is in words, right? And
Yep.
so by widening that, you have the option to, potentially find a diamond, right? But at the same time, you also have people that you interview that like, I was just wrong. Your background just isn't a fit this, right? Um, but when when I feel like there's that relationship and ability to do so, I will provide this. I've done this for people even recently, right? Where it's like, hey, here's some feedback regarding how you approach the interview or what you did that like is why we aren't moving forward, or but it is a tough thing because like I said, I've also had the instance where I shared feedback of any type, and it was defensive and things like that, and that makes it hard because if you're going to be defensive, and not every person is great at giving feedback, right? But at the same time, then
Yeah.
it makes that person less likely to do that in the future, right? Because like
Totally.
they're taking more time to do this. But I also see the other side of it, right? Like this interviewee, excuse me, has invested time with me as well. And so I
Yeah.
try and again, when
What do we owe
possible, in
them for
certain
that time?
circumstances, when I think I can provide something meaningful and useful, I will try and do so.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If I think that I can provide them at least closure of, you mentioned when the
Yeah,
skill set just isn't a match. It's like there's nothing you could have done differently. You
yeah,
interviewed great, they like you. It's just not a fit for what they're looking for. I try to pass that along in a very in a fashion that comes across as, I don't want the candidate to take it personally. And it's like, let's just
yeah,
look at this factually. They need this, you don't have it.
yeah,
Totally, understandable. Let's figure out what other opportunities are a good fit for you. The
Yeah.
other piece of feedback is, when can you share something that's going to be helpful to them to be more successful interviewing? That's when you have to really be empathetic when you're passing along that kind of feedback.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Didn't mean to speak over you there.
No, you're good.
Yeah. I'll say one last thing on this point is,
Yeah.
when I'm interviewing someone, and in particular, if it's like a first interview and I feel comfortable with them, and there's something I can do, and they're like, hey, do you have, any, especially if somebody asks me at the end of this is a great, this is a great question. If you haven't heard this, to ask for anybody that's listening is like, hey, is there anything about my background that you've heard that or haven't heard that, gives you concerns about me moving forward? I think that's a great question to ask because it is honest and it is direct, right? Like, and so generally if people ask me that question and it's like, this is clearly not a fit for some reason, and I feel like they will receive it well, right? And I have to judge from the conversation. I
Yeah.
will tell them, and I have had some situations it's like, hey, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad to have spent some time getting to know you a little bit, but we really need X, Y, or Z, or based on this
Yeah.
sort of factor. Like, it's just, I don't think it's enough of a fit for us to move
Yeah.
forward. And I don't want to waste your time, but I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed this. And like, I'd love to stay connected because we never know what the future holds. So I do try and do that. And I think it's easier when you can do it on the spot in that moment because you're already there, and
It's more
the
authentic rather than
yeah,
letting it build up as to this big, bad, awful thing of like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, I've been leading them on for a week and I haven't given them the answer. It's like, let's just have an honest conversation. And I'm glad you brought this up because I was actually going to ask you what you thought about candidates who asked this question, because that's another hot topic on LinkedIn right now
Was
is,
it?
yes, there's so
I didn't
many.
know
It's
that.
hard to keep up with all of them, but I'm on LinkedIn all day. So yeah, people, hiring managers have had some negativity around candidates that ask it this way. Do you have any reservations in moving forward with me as a candidate, or what concerns do you have about moving forward with me as a candidate? And some hiring managers will say that puts them too on the spot, it's too forward, and also it ignores the fact that there's multiple decision makers in the hiring process. And that I can agree with, is that it's not happening in a vacuum. There's other factors to consider, and there's other teammates that'll have to have input. But the way you phrased it, I think is helpful for candidates because they can ask it of saying, is there anything else you wanted to know about my background that I could share with you today? And so it's like, that's actually something you can impact in this conversation with me right now. So it's relevant. And so I love the way you phrased it. And I think candidates should definitely take that and run with it.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know there was controversy. I didn't know there's controversy around that.
There's controversy about just about everything on the internet. Well, I know we're coming close to the end of our time. I wanted to get the chance to ask you, as you may know, I always end my podcast with a question for my guests of when or where have they felt most empowered as a woman. I'm not going to ask it exactly like that to you. I'm going to say, when or where have you felt most empowered, and how has that impacted your leadership?
Yes, thank you for the modification of the question. I appreciate that, son. Yeah, I'll talk less about a specific place and more around the kind of what attributes look like that, because so for me, I think that first of all, actually, I'm gonna say I actually don't like the word empower or empowerment.
Okay.
And I understand the sentiment behind it, but I think the words matter and what we use matter, because the word empowerment in and of itself makes the assumption that I can give you power or take away that power. And one, I don't like that, and I hope that that's actually not true, because I think each of us does have power. And so I really like the word like agency and autonomy, right? Like, do you have the agency in this environment to be successful and to be able to achieve all of your potential, right? And I think that we have a responsibility as leaders to create environments where anyone, regardless of their background, has that capability, has the agency and ability. And that's recognizing that not everyone has the same things or the same needs, right? Like, equality is not necessarily equity. There are certain things that you need to do differently for different people to give them the same level of opportunity to be able to exercise that agency and autonomy. So I just share that because I think, to me, words matter. And I just, when I hear that, it's like, oh, power.
Were you an
Anyways,
English major by chance? I feel like
no,
this is.
I was a communications. Yeah, I
Oh,
was
there we go.
a communications major.
There we go.
So, but all that to say, I think that the environments that we operate in, like, uh, is there an environment that you're around that recognizes and supports and gives people the opportunity? Like, do we even think about these
Mhm.
things, first of all, right? Like,
Yeah.
do we even
Mm.
think about, like, my experience is different than your experience, right? Like, and what you need to succeed and what you have experienced in your past will influence how you operate and how you expect, right? And so I think, for me, understanding that first and being in environments where that is understood, and the second is
Yeah.
providing clarity on what success looks like, right? And
Yeah.
not to go into remote, but I think that a lot of the backlash against remote is that there's a lot of managers or leaders that don't understand how to lead by results, right? Like, they don't understand how to lead by results. And if you can't give clarity to your team about what good and great looks like, because I am passionate about building high performing teams, that means you have to give clarity about what excellence looks like and what results that you're expecting. But if you can lead with the results that you're expecting from someone, then you're giving the opportunity so that everyone can, at least, hopefully, if they're realistic results, can achieve those. And again, if you're recognizing not everyone's experience is the same, and that you're willing to embrace that and operate slightly differently for different people to help them to achieve those
Yeah.
results, then think you put yourself in an
Mm.
environment where everyone can potentially succeed.
That's an elite level of leadership that I don't know that many people achieve, because it is so easy to focus only on the end results rather than looking at each performer individually and saying, what are the individual needs of this person, or what are the individual barriers of this person that might look different, what are the roadblocks we can get out of their way to make sure they can reach these high achieving results. And I think leaders often miss that, especially in a remote setting. So we haven't even dug into that on this podcast today. We need to come back and do that, because that's a whole nother conversation. But I love where you brought us on this ending note, because as we were talking, I was thinking, I should ask Jeremy, how does he recruit women to his engineering teams? But I think the theme of this podcast has been that you don't need to just have that on your to-do list as a checkbox of like, I want to hire more women. That's the whole reason why I started this podcast, is hiring managers were saying that, but they weren't actually putting any reflection behind it. And I think our conversation has pointed out the importance of just coming at your goals or your leadership styles with an understanding that people are different, people have different needs, and what are my biases? And just already thinking about that is going to help you create team cultures, hiring processes that are going to attract people from all different kinds of backgrounds, including women, which I know is a target audience of this podcast in particular. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, being a part of this conversation. I think we got to, uncover some ways to be empathetic in leadership, and in the hiring process, which is so important to the folks that are on the job market now. So I appreciate your time today, and hope we can have you back and continue this conversation.
I really enjoyed it, Sloan, and would love to. Yeah, thank you for the time.
Yeah. Awesome. And for anybody watching, put questions in the chat. We would love to, respond to them later and keep this conversation going. I know there's more that we can talk about beyond this 30-minute convo. So we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Career Chronicles. Bye, everybody.